Imagine walking into your own restaurant, a place you built with your own hands, only to be treated like you don't belong. This isn't just any story. It's the story of Marcus, the Mountain, Brennan, a global superstar, a businessman, a man who has fought his way to the top. Today, he steps into his own restaurant not as a celebrity, but as an ordinary customer. No red carpets. No flashing cameras. Just Marcus, a hoodie, and a simple request for a table. But what happens next will leave you speechless: the whispers, the judgmental stares, the outright rejection. How far will this go before the truth is revealed? And how will they react when they realize who they've just turned away? This is a story of power, prejudice, and a lesson in respect that no one saw coming. Stay with me because you do not want to miss a second of what unfolds next. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss more inspiring stories like this one. Now, let's begin. The evening was like any other at Oak and Ember, a high-end restaurant known for its exquisite dishes and elegant ambience. Servers darted between tables, their trays balanced with glasses of fine wine and beautifully plated entrees. The air hummed with the soft chatter of well-dressed patrons enjoying their meals under the warm, dim lighting. In the kitchen, chefs called out orders, their voices blending into the rhythmic clatter of pans and knives. Everything moved in harmony, an orchestrated dance of luxury dining. And then he walked in. A towering figure dressed in a plain black hoodie, jeans, and sneakers stepped through the doors. His presence commanded attention, yet not in the way he was used to. No flashing cameras. No adoring fans. Just the silent, almost immediate scrutiny of the restaurant staff. Marcus, the Mountain, Brennan wasn't here to be recognized. He wasn't here to be a star. He had built an empire in entertainment, wrestling, and business, but tonight he was just a customer, an ordinary man stepping into his own restaurant unnoticed. That was exactly what he wanted. Marcus believed that the only way to truly understand a business was to experience it the way any other customer would, without special treatment, without red carpets. Just raw, unfiltered reality. What he didn't expect was how quickly reality would hit him. As he approached the hostess stand, two employees standing behind it exchanged quick glances. Natalie, a young woman with sharp features and an air of practiced impatience, barely lifted her eyes from the screen of her tablet. Next to her, Tyler, a host in his mid-20s, leaned slightly toward her and whispered something under his breath. A smirk flickered on both of their faces. Marcus took a deep breath and smiled warmly. "Hey there, table for one please." Natalie exhaled heavily, finally looking up at him with thinly veiled disinterest. "We're busy," she said flatly. "Maybe try somewhere else." The words landed like a slap, but Marcus's expression didn't change. He glanced around. Several tables were clearly unoccupied, and guests were still being seated without issue. He had experienced prejudice before, being judged unfairly, being underestimated, but there was something different about this. This was his own restaurant. "I don't mind waiting," he replied, his voice steady but kind. "I'll just take a look at the menu while I wait." Natalie rolled her eyes and turned to Tyler. The two exchanged a knowing look, their smirks deepening. "We have a dress code, you know," she said, eyes scanning his hoodie and jeans with clear disdain. "You don't exactly fit the type of crowd we serve here." A flicker of something passed through Marcus's chest, something cold, something sharp. Not anger, not yet, but a deep, unmistakable disappointment. Years of fighting battles in boardrooms, of being the only man of color in rooms full of decision-makers, had taught Marcus patience. He knew the weight of perception. He had built an empire by defying expectations. But tonight, standing in a restaurant he had personally invested in, where his vision had been about inclusivity and excellence, it stung. For a moment, silence stretched between them. A few nearby diners had caught parts of the exchange, and though they glanced his way, none intervened. The quiet judgment, the passive acceptance of what was happening, was louder than any word spoken. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Is there a manager I can speak to?" Natalie arched an eyebrow, her demeanor shifting from disinterest to something colder. "Why? You think complaining will change anything?" she scoffed. "You're wasting your time." Marcus's eyes flicked to the small gold name tag pinned to her uniform. "Natalie," he filed it away in his mind. "I'd still like to speak to the manager," he repeated, his tone unwavering. Natalie huffed loudly and picked up the phone. "Aaron," she called into the receiver, "can you come to the front? We've got a problem." Problem. The word sat heavily in the air. Within moments, a tall man in a crisp white shirt emerged from the back. Aaron, the floor manager, walked with a practiced confidence, his gaze already carrying an air of irritation before he even reached the host stand. His eyes landed on Marcus, and for a second, there was a flicker of something familiar, something like recognition, but it vanished just as quickly. "What's going on here?" Aaron asked, looking between Natalie and Marcus. "This guy wants a table," Natalie said, rolling her eyes. "I told him we're full, but he keeps insisting." Marcus extended his hand toward Aaron. "Good evening," he said, his voice measured. "I just wanted to grab a quick meal. I understand you're busy, but I noticed some open tables, so I thought I'd wait." Aaron didn't take his hand. Instead, he folded his arms across his chest, his expression turning skeptical. "Look," Aaron said, lowering his voice slightly as if to be discreet, "we have a certain clientele here. You don't exactly fit the bill." There it was, the final nail in the coffin. Marcus could feel it now, the simmering frustration bubbling beneath the surface, the weight of every time he had been judged, every time he had been told he didn't belong. "Are you saying I'm not welcome here?" he asked, his voice even, but the undercurrent of steel unmistakable. Aaron shrugged. "I'm saying we have standards. If you don't meet them, that's not my problem." Before Marcus could respond, a young server, a girl no older than 20, stepped forward. Her face was pale, her eyes flickering between Aaron and Marcus. Something was dawning on her. "Aaron," she whispered, hesitant. That's Mr. Brennan." Aaron's posture stiffened, his face paled slightly, and for the first time, there was a flicker of doubt. "What are you talking about?" he muttered. The server swallowed hard. "That's Marcus Brennan," she said more firmly now. "The owner." Natalie let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "No way," she scoffed, shaking her head. "You're kidding, right?" Marcus didn't say a word. He just stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle in. And as realization dawned, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. A heavy silence settled over oak and ember, thicker than the scent of rosemary and garlic lingering in the air. Every clink of silverware, every hushed whisper among diners seemed to dissolve into the tension at the hostess stand. The room had been alive with conversations just moments ago, but now it was as if the very heartbeat of the restaurant had stalled. Ryan's face drained of color. The words of the young server, Lily, still echoed in the space between them. "That's Marcus Brennan, the owner." Natalie let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "No way," she scoffed, disbelief dripping from her voice. "You expect me to believe this guy owns the restaurant?" Marcus didn't need to answer. He simply stood there, his broad shoulders squared, his calm but unwavering presence speaking louder than any words could. Aaron swallowed hard, his mind scrambling to process what he had just heard. His confident posture just moments ago, so firm, so dismissive, had begun to falter. He had just refused a table to the one man who could decide his future at this very establishment. All eyes were now on Marcus. Diners who had silently observed from their tables now leaned in, their curiosity sharpened by the weight of the unfolding drama. Some whispered in hushed tones, others simply stared. Tyler, the host who had stood by watching everything unfold, suddenly found the floor incredibly interesting. His usual smirk had vanished, replaced by an uneasy stiffness in his shoulders. Lily, the young server who had spoken up, glanced nervously between Marcus and Aaron. She had seen this kind of thing before, people judged for the way they looked, the way they dressed, but she had never expected it to happen here. Not in a place she worked. Not like this. Aaron forced a smile, one that barely reached his eyes. "Mr. Brennan," he started, his voice unsteady. I didn't realize." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his deep, steady voice carrying a weight that made the room seem smaller. "Didn't realize what?" Aaron blinked. "I didn't mean any disrespect." "Didn't mean it?" Marcus repeated, his voice deceptively calm. "So tell me, what exactly did you mean?" Aaron shifted on his feet. The words were there, stuck in his throat, but none of them could save him. Marcus exhaled, his hands resting on his hips as he looked at Aaron, really looked at him. "You looked at me, saw what I was wearing, and decided I didn't belong here," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "You didn't see me. You saw an assumption." The words hung heavy in the air. Aaron opened his mouth, but nothing came out because, deep down, he knew. He knew Marcus was right. And Natalie, still frozen at the host stand, folded her arms tightly across her chest, as if shielding herself from the judgment of the room. For the first time that night, she looked uncertain. Marcus sighed, rubbing a hand along his jaw. He wasn't here to humiliate anyone. He wasn't here to make a spectacle. But this moment needed to mean something. His gaze flicked around the restaurant, scanning the faces that had been quietly watching, listening. "This isn't just about me," he continued. "It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong, like they're not the right type of customer." A shift rippled through the crowd. A woman at a nearby table nodded slightly, her lips pressed together as if remembering a time she had felt the same. A middle-aged man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, suddenly seeing the situation from a different perspective. Aaron cleared his throat. "Mr. Brennan, I understand if you're upset." Marcus let out a soft chuckle, low, almost humorless. "Upset?" He shook his head. "No, Aaron. I'm disappointed." And somehow, that felt worse. Aaron's jaw tightened. Marcus took a step forward, his presence alone enough to command the room's attention. What I experienced tonight isn't just about bad service. It's about a mindset, one that assumes before asking, one that judges before understanding. He let the words settle before adding, if this is how I was treated, the owner, I have to wonder how many others have been turned away, dismissed, or looked down on just because they didn't fit the bill. Aaron flinched. Natalie shifted uncomfortably. Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear. Marcus finally exhaled, the fire in his gaze softening just slightly. Here's the real question. What are you going to do about it? Aaron swallowed again, his Adam's apple bobbing. His voice cracked slightly, then steadied. I'll make this right. Marcus nodded, but his expression remained unreadable. Good. A pause, then, but I'm not just looking for an apology. I'm looking for change. The atmosphere had shifted. The tension, once thick and suffocating, now carried something else, a sense of reckoning. Marcus straightened his shoulders and looked at Natalie. And you? Natalie hesitated. Her confidence, the dismissive smirk, the attitude, was nowhere to be found. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Her voice was quiet. I didn't know who you were. Marcus's expression didn't change. And that's exactly the problem. A hush fell over the room once more. Natalie swallowed, and though she didn't say more, something in her posture shifted. The weight of her own actions had finally settled in. Marcus turned, looking at the staff members who had gathered in the background. Things are going to change, he said, his voice carrying a finality that no one dared challenge. Not just for me. For every customer who walks through these doors. Aaron nodded quickly, almost too eagerly. Yes, Mr. Brennan. Understood. Marcus gave one last glance at Natalie, Tyler, and the others before stepping past the host stand. He walked toward an open table and sat down, waiting to see how they would handle things next. As he picked up the menu, the weight of the moment still lingered across the room. Natalie and Aaron exchanged a look, one that said, for the first time, they were really seeing the impact of their choices. The restaurant's air had changed. It was no longer filled with the warm aroma of fresh rosemary and charred steak. It was thick with tension, embarrassment, and realization. The murmur of whispered conversations floated through the room like an uneasy wind. Servers who had once bustled between tables now moved cautiously, their eyes flicking toward Marcus seated at his table, waiting to see what they would do next. Aaron and Natalie still stood at the hostess stand, their previous confidence shattered. Tyler, the young host who had smirked earlier, had taken a step back, his face pale. Lily, the brave young server who had spoken up, stood a few feet away, watching with quiet anticipation. For a moment, the weight of what had just happened settled like a stone in everyone's stomach. They had judged a man not by his character but by his appearance. They had dismissed him, spoken to him with condescension, and now they had to face the consequences. Aaron cleared his throat, forcing a polite but uneasy smile. Mr. Brennan, can I bring you anything while you wait? Marcus glanced up from the menu he was scanning. His dark eyes met Aaron's, but there was no anger there. Only something far heavier. Disappointment, expectation, a demand for more than just empty words. No, Marcus said calmly. I want to see how you handle the rest of your customers first. Aaron hesitated, then nodded, shifting uncomfortably under the scrutiny of not just Marcus, but the entire restaurant. Diners who had been quietly watching now exchanged glances. A well-dressed woman in her 50s sitting near the bar leaned toward her husband. "I had no idea he owned the place," she murmured. "But the way they treated him before. Unbelievable." A young man at the corner table tapped furiously on his phone, likely crafting a post that would soon flood social media. The headline practically wrote itself: "The mountain gets rejected at his own restaurant, and he lets it play out." But Marcus wasn't thinking about headlines. He wasn't here to put on a show. He wanted to know, was the lesson sinking in? Would anything actually change? Across the room, Natalie shifted uneasily. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. She took a slow breath and turned toward the next guest approaching the hostess stand, a middle-aged black man in a neatly pressed button-down and slacks. Her voice wavered. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" The man hesitated. He had clearly been watching the earlier confrontation, and his guarded expression said he wasn't sure what kind of reception he'd get. Natalie forced a smile, but Marcus could see the hesitation in her posture, the stiffness in her fingers as she clutched the reservation book. She was trying, but was it real? Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching closely as Natalie checked the guest in without incident. Was this growth, or was this fear? As the night went on, the tension in the restaurant began to shift. Aaron moved through the dining room with newfound awareness, checking on guests more frequently than before. Natalie's sharp edge had softened, and while she wasn't suddenly warm and welcoming, she had lost the arrogance that had painted her interactions before. Marcus could tell it was sinking in, but there was still something missing. True change doesn't come from fear of consequences. It comes from understanding. And so, as the restaurant settled back into a more normal rhythm, Marcus made a decision. He stood up, the sound of his chair scraping against the polished floor causing more than a few heads to turn. With slow, deliberate steps, he made his way back to the hostess stand. Aaron, Natalie, and Tyler stiffened. They weren't ready, but that was the point. Marcus didn't speak right away. Instead, he let the silence settle, let the weight of the moment press down on them. Then, his voice low but unwavering, "Tell me what you've learned tonight." Aaron opened his mouth first, but Marcus held up a hand. "Not excuses. Not apologies. What have you learned?" Natalie swallowed hard. She looked at Aaron, then Tyler, then back to Marcus. Her voice was quieter now, less defensive. "I judged you before I knew who you were," she admitted. "And I shouldn't have. I shouldn't judge anyone like that." It wasn't a perfect answer. It wasn't deep, not yet, but it was a start. Aaron cleared his throat. "I assumed," he said. "I made a decision about you before I knew anything about you. And it wasn't just about you. It was about the type of people we turn away every day without even realizing it." Now they were getting somewhere. Marcus nodded slowly, letting the words settle before he spoke again. "A mistake doesn't define you," he said. "How you grow from it does." Natalie's lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to offer something other than anger. "You have a choice," Marcus continued. "You can carry this moment as just an embarrassing night where you almost lost your job, or you can carry it as a reminder, a moment where you learned something that makes you better." Aaron nodded, his face still flushed, but there was something genuine in his eyes now. "I want to be better." For the first time, Marcus smiled, just slightly. "Good." Then, with a glance at Natalie and Tyler, he added, "Prove it." Marcus didn't need to say anything more. He had planted the seed. Whether or not it grew, that was up to them. He turned and walked back to his table, finally placing his order with Lily, the only staff member who had truly seen him from the start. As the night continued, Natalie and Aaron's interactions with guests felt different, more careful, more intentional. Not perfect, but progress. But was it real, or was it just a reaction to the presence of Marcus in the room? That was a question only time could answer. The restaurant had returned to a relative calm, but the weight of what had just transpired still lingered in the air. Oak and Ember was no longer just a place where guests enjoyed gourmet meals, it had become the stage for a lesson in humility, bias, and accountability. Marcus sat at his table, quietly observing. He could feel the shift in the room, not just from the staff, but from the diners as well. Conversations had taken on a different tone, as if the entire restaurant had been awakened to something they had previously ignored. At the hostess stand, Aaron and Natalie remained frozen, their minds still processing the conversation they had just had with Marcus. Tyler, the younger host, stood beside them, his usual smug demeanor nowhere to be found. The impact of the moment was undeniable, but was it enough? For the first time that evening, Natalie wasn't speaking. The sharp confidence she had carried just minutes ago had dissolved into something closer to reflection. She stood stiffly, arms folded tightly across her chest, her eyes darting to Aaron as if searching for reassurance. Aaron, however, looked lost. He had always been in control, the kind of manager who prided himself on efficiency, on maintaining the perfect aesthetic for the restaurant. But now, he was grappling with something deeper, something that made his usual approach feel hollow. The silence between them was suffocating. Finally, Tyler cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "So, what do we do now?" Aaron exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "We do better." His words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of realization. Natalie's arms tightened around herself. "That's easy to say now," she muttered. "But what happens when he leaves? Do you really think we'll be any different?" Her words struck a nerve, not just with Aaron, but with Tyler, Lily, and the rest of the staff who had been listening. And they weren't wrong, change wasn't about a single conversation. It was about what came after. Across the room, Marcus continued to watch, letting them sit in their discomfort. He wasn't here for temporary adjustments. He wanted to see if they were capable of something real. The answer came in the form of a guest. An older woman dressed in a simple cardigan and slacks approached the hostess stand. She carried herself with quiet dignity, but there was hesitation in her steps. She had watched the earlier exchange unfold and, like many others, she wanted to see if anything had truly changed. Natalie glanced at her, and for a brief moment, something flickered across her face, something almost defensive. But then she seemed to catch herself. She straightened, inhaled, and spoke. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation, or would you like a table?" The woman smiled gently, as if she could sense the effort in Natalie's voice. "A table for one, if possible." Natalie nodded, reaching for the seating chart. No hesitation. No dismissive glance at her clothing. No quick assumption that she wasn't the right type of customer. It was a small moment, but Marcus noticed. And so did the other guests. The lesson was beginning to take root. Back at the table, Lily, the young server who had first recognized Marcus, approached with a glass of water. "Mr. Brennan," she said softly, setting the glass down. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened earlier. That's not who we are. Or at least, it's not who we should be." Marcus looked up at her, his expression thoughtful. "What made you speak up?" Lily hesitated, shifting on her feet. "Because it was wrong," she admitted. "And because I knew who you were." He tilted his head slightly. "And if I hadn't been me?" Lily's face flushed. She didn't have an answer, and that was the point. Marcus sighed, but there was no malice in it, only understanding. "That's the real challenge, Lily. Standing up when you don't recognize the person. When there's no risk, no fame, no consequences." She nodded, her lips pressing together in quiet determination. "I'll do better," she said. And this time, it wasn't just a promise, it was a commitment. As the night wore on, the restaurant slowly returned to normal, but the energy had shifted. The staff moved with more awareness, more intention. Erin personally checked on guests with a sincerity that hadn't been there before. Natalie still seemed cautious, but the sharpness in her demeanor had dulled, replaced with a kind of reluctant self-awareness. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Change wasn't about one night. It was about what happened when no one was watching. And that's what he intended to find out. He finished his meal, placed his napkin on the table, and stood. Conversations quieted as he walked toward the exit. The air was thick with anticipation. Would he say anything? Would he give them one final message? At the hostess stand, he paused, turning back to Erin and Natalie. "I'll be back." Erin straightened, his face still flushed but more determined than before. "And next time," Marcus continued, his gaze scanning the restaurant, "I won't be undercover." He let the words sink in, then gave a small nod before walking toward the doors. The lesson wasn't over. It had only just begun. The doors of oak and ember swung shut behind Marcus, but the atmosphere inside remained charged. It was as if the entire restaurant had taken a collective breath and was now waiting, uncertain of what would happen next. The air still carried the lingering tension of his words, the undeniable truth he had left behind. "I'll be back. And next time, I won't be undercover." For Erin, Natalie, and the rest of the staff, the reality of that statement settled in like a weight on their shoulders. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Erin stood at the hostess stand, staring at the entrance long after Marcus had left. His mind replayed every moment of the night, the way he had dismissed the man without a second thought, the way his stomach had dropped when Lily had revealed who he was, the way disappointment had sat heavy in Marcus's gaze. Across from him, Natalie rubbed her arms as if trying to shake off an invisible chill. For the first time, she wasn't sure where she stood. She had always prided herself on being efficient, on keeping things moving, but tonight she had been forced to slow down, to really see what had happened. Tyler, usually the first to crack a joke or brush things off, shifted uncomfortably beside them. He wasn't saying much, which was rare. Finally, Natalie exhaled. "Do you think he meant that?" Erin turned to her, brow furrowed. "Meant what?" She swallowed. "That he'll be back." Erin let out a humorless chuckle. "Natalie, when was the last time you saw Marcus say something he didn't mean?" She had no response to that, because the truth was, he would come back. And when he did, they wouldn't be able to hide behind ignorance. Meanwhile, the diners had not forgotten what they had witnessed. Conversations hummed at low volumes, but the energy was different. There was an awareness now, one that hadn't existed before. A man in his late 40s leaned toward his wife. "Did you see the way they changed after he revealed himself? Makes you wonder how they treat people who don't have a big name." His wife, a woman with kind eyes and a skeptical smile, nodded. Maybe this is the wake-up call they needed. At another table, a younger couple scrolled through their phones, already seeing posts pop up online about what had just happened. The story was spreading. Aaron noticed the shift too. He could feel the unspoken judgment in the air. It wasn't just Marcus he had let down. It was every single person in the room who had watched it happen. And now, they were all watching him to see what he would do next. As the restaurant began to settle into its usual rhythm, Aaron pulled Natalie and Tyler aside. Lily lingered a few feet away, clearly listening. Aaron crossed his arms. "We need to talk." Natalie sighed. "I know." Tyler looked reluctant. "What's there to talk about? We got called out." "Yeah, but it's not like we're the first people to judge someone by the way they look." Aaron's jaw tightened. "That's exactly the problem, Tyler." Tyler scoffed. "So what now? We're supposed to change overnight just because the mountain gave us a lecture?" Lily, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "No, but maybe we're supposed to start." The words hung in the air. Aaron exhaled, nodding. "She's right. We're not going to fix everything overnight, but we can't pretend this didn't happen either." Natalie hesitated before nodding. "So what do we do?" Aaron glanced at the dining room, then back at his team. "We do better. Starting now." For the first time that night, Aaron took action not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He moved through the restaurant, personally checking on guests, offering genuine apologies where they were due, not the kind of scripted, obligatory customer service ones, but real, human moments of acknowledgement. Natalie adjusted her posture, straightening her shoulders as she greeted the next guest with sincerity, not just habit. There was no condescension in her tone, no quick judgment in her expression. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Tyler still looked unsure, but when a young man in casual clothes approached, he didn't hesitate this time. "Welcome to Oak and Ember. Would you like a table?" His tone was neutral, not dismissive. Marcus wasn't here anymore, but his presence lingered, and the staff knew this wasn't just about making things look good while he was watching. It was about proving to themselves and everyone else that they could be better. The night finally wound down, and as the last few guests filtered out, Aaron locked the front doors. The weight in his chest hadn't lifted entirely, but there was something different now, a sense of determination. He turned to his staff, looking each of them in the eye. "We messed up," his voice was steady, honest. "And we're going to fix it." Natalie nodded slowly. "If we want to be the kind of restaurant that actually welcomes people, we can't just say it. We have to mean it." Tyler exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess that means I got to work on the way I talk to customers." Lily smiled slightly. "Guess we all do." Aaron ran a hand through his hair. "This isn't about keeping our jobs. It's about keeping our integrity." He paused, then added, "And next time he walks through that door, I don't want to see fear in this team's eyes. I want to see pride." The group stood in silence for a moment, letting those words settle. Because deep down, They all knew this wasn't just about one night. This was about who they were becoming. And when Marcus returned, they would be ready. The following days at Oak and Ember were different, not in an earth-shattering way, but in the kind of subtle shift that only those paying attention would notice. The staff moved with more awareness. The air carried an undercurrent of quiet reflection. But the real question wasn't whether they could change for a few nights. The real question was whether the change would last. Aaron stood near the hostess stand, flipping through reservation logs, but his mind wasn't on the names listed. He was replaying everything from that night, the moment he had turned Marcus away, the way his stomach had dropped when he realized the truth, the way the entire restaurant had stared at him, watching his reaction, judging his choices. For the first time in his career, he wasn't worried about profit margins or table turnovers. He was worried about what kind of leader he had become. Natalie approached cautiously, watching Aaron as she straightened the silverware at the front desk. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she asked. Aaron sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah." Natalie exhaled. "Me too." She sat down a stack of menus and leaned against the podium. "I keep asking myself, if Lily hadn't said anything, would we have ever known?" Aaron frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before continuing. If Marcus had just walked away that night, if he never revealed who he was. How many other people have we done this to? How many people have we made feel like they don't belong? Her words hit hard. Aaron swallowed. It was one thing to realize a mistake. It was another to admit just how many times it had happened before. Tyler, who had been listening from the side, finally spoke. "Well, at least we're thinking about it now. That's got to count for something, right?" Natalie shot him a look. "Thinking about it doesn't change anything. Acting on it does." Aaron nodded. "She's right. And if we're serious about making this place better, we need to do more than just feel bad about it." Tyler exhaled. "So what do we do?" A long pause stretched between them. Then Aaron set his jaw. "We start by owning it." Later that evening, as the dinner rush picked up, a familiar tension settled over the restaurant. The guests were different. The orders were new. But the weight of change still lingered in the air. And then it happened. A man walked in, a Latino gentleman in his late 40s, dressed in a hoodie and jeans. He carried himself with quiet confidence, but there was hesitation in his steps as he approached the hostess stand. Aaron felt his chest tighten. This was it, the moment that would define whether they had truly learned from their mistakes. Natalie took a deep breath. No eye rolls, no judgment, just a simple, genuine approach. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Oak and Ember. Do you have a reservation, or would you like a table?" The man blinked, as if surprised by the warmth in her voice. I don't have a reservation. Just looking for a table for one." Natalie nodded. "Of course. We'll get you seated in just a moment." As she grabbed a menu, Aaron caught her eye. There was no hesitation this time, no forced politeness, just real change. And for the first time in a long time, he felt proud of his team. Later that night, as the final guests left and the staff cleaned up, Aaron gathered everyone for a meeting. This time, it wasn't about schedules or policy changes. It was about. This powerful story highlights the importance of self-awareness, humility, and change in addressing deep-rooted biases. Marcus, the Mountain, Brennan, a man who built an empire, faces rejection in his own restaurant due to the judgments of others. His calm response to prejudice forces the staff to confront their assumptions and biases, ultimately leading to a moment of reckoning. The key lesson here is that everyone deserves respect, not based on appearances, status, or preconceived notions, but because of their inherent worth. True change doesn't come from fear of consequences, it arises from understanding and personal growth. This story teaches us that we can't just acknowledge mistakes, we must act on them, continuously improving, not just when we're under scrutiny, but in every interaction. Let's all strive to create a world where we see people for who they truly are, not for the assumptions we make about them. If you believe in the power of change and growth, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you never miss a moment of inspiring stories that make a difference.